They told me I was lucky to have a place to live. My own son said that to my face. Dad, you're lucky we took you in. 37 years I spent building a business with my hands, and my son thought he was doing me a favor by letting me sleep in his spare bedroom. 6 months later, I walked out of that house. I took my suitcase, my medication, and $9.4 million. 2 weeks after that, my son called me crying. Let me back up. My name is Douglas. Doug, to anyone who's known me longer than 5 minutes, and I turned 64 last March. I spent the better part of 4 decades in commercial HVAC contracting. Started with 1 truck, 1 license, and a credit card I maxed out buying equipment. By the time I sold Ashworth Climate Solutions to a regional group out of Charlotte, I had 41 employees, contracts across 3 states, and a reputation that took 30 years to earn. The buyer paid me $9.8 million, cash at closing. I paid my taxes, settled some debts, invested the rest with my financial advisor of 20 years. Then I watched my balance grow while I pretended it didn't exist. My wife Carol passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 11 weeks from diagnosis to the end. We'd had 31 years together. And then one Tuesday in November, she was gone, and I was standing in a house in Raleigh that suddenly felt like a museum. Every room full of her things. Every morning waking up to a silence I didn't know how to fill. My son Brandon called 3 weeks after the funeral. He and his wife Amber lived in Scottsdale, Arizona. Nice house in a golf community, 4 bedrooms, neighborhood where everyone drove something German. Brandon was 40, worked in corporate sales, made decent money, but spent like the next paycheck was already signed. Amber was 37, stayed home, ran a lifestyle blog that had maybe 8,000 followers, and spoke about her personal brand the way some people talk about religion. Dad, you shouldn't be alone in that house, Brandon said. Come stay with us. We have the room. It makes sense. It sounded like love. I was grieving and exhausted, and the house in Raleigh felt too large for one person. So I said yes. I sold most of the furniture, put the Raleigh house on the market, and drove to Scottsdale with 2 suitcases and a cardboard box of things I couldn't leave behind. Carol's photograph on our first anniversary, my father's pocket watch, a coffee mug, my daughter, Brandon's younger sister Pam, had painted for me in middle school. Pam lived in Portland now, taught high school chemistry, called me every Sunday without fail. She'd offered to have me come stay with her, but I didn't want to disrupt her life. Brandon had the bigger house, the extra bedroom, the insistence. The extra bedroom turned out to be the one at the end of the hall, next to the garage door that the kids left open constantly, so cold air poured through the wall every Arizona night. Small room, no window facing the backyard, a dresser with a broken drawer that nobody had fixed. I didn't say anything about it. I unpacked my 2 suitcases and told myself this was temporary. That was 14 months before everything unraveled. The first few weeks I tried to make myself useful. I cooked on weeknights when Amber had her book club or her Pilates or whatever she had. I fixed the garage door sensor that had been malfunctioning for apparently a year. I picked up my grandchildren, Owen 9 and Maya 7, from school on days Amber had things to do, which turned out to be most days. I didn't mind the kids. They were the best part of being there. Owen was serious and funny in equal measure, the kind of kid who asked questions adults don't think to ask. Maya drew pictures and left them on my dresser like offerings. I kept everyone. About 2 months in, Brandon brought up money. Not directly. Brandon rarely did anything directly. He mentioned that the household expenses had gone up, that Scottsdale wasn't cheap, that they'd had to replace the AC unit last summer and was still recovering from that. He mentioned it the way someone mentions the weather right before they ask you to close the window. I handed him $400 the next day. Cash. He took it without making eye contact. After that, $400 a month became the arrangement. No conversation. No agreement. It just happened, the way water finds its level. I gave him cash at the beginning of each month, and he deposited it without comment, and Amber started treating it as something she was owed rather than something she'd received. By month 4, she began leaving grocery lists on the kitchen counter with certain items circled, things she expected me to cover. Wine, specialty cheeses, the organic snacks the kids liked. I bought them. I didn't say anything. I watched them carefully. That's what I do. 37 years of running a business teaches you to watch how people behave when they think nobody's accounting. Amber counted everything. She counted what I ate, how long I showered, whether I'd used the good towels in the hall bathroom. She didn't say any of this out loud. She communicated it in the particular way skilled resenters do. A pause before answering. A look that lasted 1 second too long. A comment dropped into a different conversation. I just feel like our space has gotten smaller, she told Brandon once, loud enough for me to hear from the kitchen. He said nothing. That was his specialty. Brendan had become a man who said nothing at the moments when nothing was the wrong answer. I watched him choose peace with Amber over and over, every small cowardice adding up to something I no longer recognized as my son. 6 months in, I came home from a walk. I walked every morning, doctor's orders, blood pressure, to find Amber redecorating the spare bedroom. Not my bedroom. A different spare bedroom down the other hall, the one they used for storage. She was measuring the walls. There was a catalogue on the floor, dog-eared to a page showing nursery furniture. I asked her about it at dinner. She said they were thinking of converting it. I asked converting it to what? She said a home office for her brand work. I said that made sense. Later, I heard her tell Brandon, in a voice calibrated to reach me, that she needed her own space in her own house, and that the current arrangement couldn't go on indefinitely. Brandon's response was 4 words. I'll figure it out. He came to my room the next morning, sat on the edge of the broken drawer dresser. Didn't look at me directly, said he'd been thinking, and here he did that thing where he cleared his throat before delivering something he'd rehearsed. That it might be better for everyone if I started looking at senior communities in the area. Not a nursing home, he said quickly, like the phrase was a slur. Independent living. Nice places. I'd have my own space. It would be better for my health, probably. I looked at my son for a long moment. How long do I have? I asked. He said 60 days would be reasonable. Then he left before I could answer. I sat in that room with the broken drawer and the garage cold wall, and I didn't feel what he expected me to feel. I didn't feel panic or desperation or the particular helplessness of a man being discarded. I'd suspected this was coming for at least 3 months. What I felt, sitting there in the quiet, was something close to relief. The test was over. I had my answer. Let me explain the test. When I sold Ashworth Climate Solutions, I told Brandon I'd sold it for $2 million. That's the number I gave him. $2 million, minus taxes, minus Carol's medical bills, modest retirement, nothing spectacular. I told him I'd downsized for simplicity, sold the Raleigh house for roughly what it was worth, and was living carefully on what was left. I let him believe his father was comfortable but not wealthy. I let him believe the $400 a month was meaningful to me. I told Pam the truth. I've always told Pam the truth. She'd said, back when I first told her about the plan to move to Scottsdale, Dad, you know how Brandon is? You know how Amber is? I said I needed to know for certain. She understood. She wasn't happy about it, but she understood. The morning after Brandon's 60-day notice, I walked to the kitchen at 6 a.m., made coffee in the pot I'd bought to replace their broken one, and opened the banking app on my phone. The balance, $9,412,000, give or take daily interest. I took a long, slow sip of coffee and started making calls. First call, Miles Denton, my financial advisor. 22 years we'd worked together, since I was still driving the second truck and worrying about making payroll. Miles answered before the second ring. I told him I needed $600,000 liquid within 3 weeks. He asked if everything was okay. I said it was about to be. Second call, a real estate agent named Karen Whitfield who'd been recommended by Miles. I told her I was looking for a single-family home in the Arcadia neighborhood of Phoenix. I'd done my research, knew the area, old money and mature trees. The kind of neighborhood that doesn't announce itself. Budget up to $600,000. Cash purchase, quick close preferred. She said cash buyers were her favorite kind. We scheduled viewings for the following Thursday. I didn't tell Brandon or Amber anything. I went about my days. Picked up Owen and Maya from school on Tuesdays, cooked on Wednesday nights, fixed the backyard gate that had been scraping the concrete since before I arrived. I watched Amber take photographs of her lunch for her blog and Brandon answer work emails at dinner, and both of them be completely unaware that the old man in the small bedroom was quietly engineering his exit. Thursday, I drove to Phoenix while they thought I was at the cardiologist. I had seen my cardiologist. That part was true. Mild atrial fibrillation, well managed, nothing dramatic. But the appointment ended at 11, and the first property showing was at 1. Karen met me at the first house. 3 bedrooms, craftsman style, covered patio, big kitchen. Nice, but not quite right. The second was too close to a main road. The third, a Spanish colonial on a quiet street with a courtyard and a fig tree in the backyard, I knew within 30 seconds of standing in the driveway. Built in 2004, Karen said. 3-bed, 2.5 bath. Primary suite on the main floor. Detached casita for guests. Sellers had already relocated to Oregon, motivated for a clean close. Listed at $580. I made a full-price offer that afternoon. Cash, as is, 15-day close. Karen called me the next morning. Offer accepted. I spent the following 2 weeks doing what needed to be done quietly. Filed the change of address with the post office. Set up utilities at the new address. Called Pam, who cried a little and then said, "Good," and then cried a little more. Made an appointment with an estate attorney named Howard Slade, new to me, not connected to anyone in Brandon and Amber's world. The night before I moved, I sat in the small bedroom for the last time and wrote a note. I wrote several versions. The first was too cold. The second explained too much. The third was what I wanted. Brandon, I appreciate you opening your home. I found my own place and will be out by noon. Thank you for the clarity these past 14 months. Dad, not cruel, just honest. The word clarity was doing particular work there. I hoped he was smart enough to hear it. Close of escrow happened on a Tuesday. The movers arrived at my room at 8 a.m. Brandon had already left for work. Amber had taken the kids to school, then gone to her Pilates class. I had the house to myself for the loading. 2 hours, professional crew, everything in boxes I'd been quietly packing for 10 days. I left the note on the kitchen counter, weighted down with the coffee mug I'd bought for their broken pot. A small gesture, maybe a cruel one. I'm still not sure. I locked the spare bedroom door behind me, left the key on the counter beside the note, and walked out into an Arizona morning that was already bright and warm and smelled like something blooming. The drive to Arcadia took 23 minutes. I stood in my courtyard and watched the movers carry boxes through my front door. And for the first time in 14 months, I felt my shoulders drop. Not relax. Drop. Like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long I'd forgotten it was weight. I made coffee in my own kitchen, in a pot I'd chosen. At a counter that was mine, looking out at a fig tree that would need pruning in the spring, and a courtyard I was already planning to furnish. Then I went to my real office. Not a converted bedroom, not a corner with a broken drawer, a real office with a door that closed, and I sat down and called Howard Slade. Brandon texted at 2:17 that afternoon. Got your note. You didn't have to leave so suddenly. Hope you're okay. Let me know if you need anything. 11 words of obligation. No question about where I'd gone. No curiosity about how I'd arranged it so fast. Just the minimum required to feel like he'd responded. I didn't reply. He called 3 days later. I let it go to voicemail. His message said he and Amber were concerned and that the kids were asking questions, and could I please call back? I noted the order. Himself and Amber first, kids second. Amber called 4 days after that. Left a voicemail in a voice that mixed warmth and anxiety in a way that made clear she was aware of both. Doug, we just want to make sure you're settled and okay. We care about you. The kids miss you. Please call us back. I saved both voicemails and deleted neither. What happened next was not something I planned. Or rather, I planned parts of it. I did not plan what Pam called the full education. Howard Slade called me 2 weeks after I'd moved in. He'd finished reviewing my estate documents, the will I'd drafted with a different attorney in Raleigh several years earlier. We were updating everything. The beneficiaries, the structure, the trusts. He asked if I wanted Brandon informed of the changes. I said yes. I wanted him informed specifically. Howard called Brandon on a Tuesday morning, introduced himself as my estate attorney, and asked if Brandon could come in to discuss some matters related to my estate planning. Brandon assumed this was routine. He came in that Thursday. Amber waiting in the parking garage because Howard had specified the meeting was for family only. Howard told me later that Brandon sat down with the expression of someone who expects to hear his name at the top of a list. Howard laid out the portfolio, $9.4 million. The business sale, $7.2 million net after tax. 5 years of investment returns. The Riley house proceeds. Brandon sat very still for a moment. "I don't understand," he said. Howard explained it plainly. The sale price had been $9.8 million, not $2 million. The retirement I'd described was a performance. The $400 a month had been a gesture, not a necessity. The man Brandon had thought needed to be housed had been sitting on the kind of money that would have allowed him to buy Brandon's entire golf community and still have enough left for a reasonable vacation. Brandon asked Howard to repeat the number. Howard did. In the silence that followed, Brandon apparently put his head down on Howard's conference table. Not dramatically. He just lowered his head onto his arms like a man who needed a moment. Howard gave him one. Then Howard explained the second part. My will, as it now stood, left the house in Arcadia and $500,000 to Pam. Left trust funds totaling $1.8 million for Owen and Maya, accessible at 25, with Pam as trustee. Left $400,000 to 3 non-profits I'd chosen deliberately. Left the remainder, approximately $7 million, to a charitable foundation I'd established in Carol's name. Brandon's share, $100,000. From $9.4 million to $100,000. Howard delivered this with the calm professionalism of someone who has done this before. Brandon left the building and sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes. Amber found him there. He told her the number. She asked him to repeat it. He did. She then said something that Brandon later told me about himself. In the conversation that came weeks after all of this, the conversation where things got honest, she said, "We need to call an attorney." They called 2 attorneys. Both said the same thing. A competent adult in Arizona can dispose of his estate however he chooses. There was no basis for challenge. No undue influence, no incapacity, no fraud. Their father had been, if anything, extraordinarily clear-headed. Amber suggested they contact Adult Protective Services. She had a theory, she told the second attorney, that I was being manipulated by someone, my financial advisor, the estate attorney Pam. The attorney told her gently that having a different financial arrangement than your family expected was not evidence of manipulation. The consultations cost them $1,400 total. They came away with nothing. The calls to my number increased. 15 in 1 week, then 22. I'd changed my number by then, and only Pam and Howard had the new one. Brandon called Pam. Pam said she knew where I was, and that I was fine, and that if they wanted to reach me, they needed to give me time and space and stop calling her. At 11 at night, they found my address through property records. It's public in Arizona, nothing I could prevent, and drove past my house one Sunday afternoon. I watched from my front window as Brandon's SUV idled at the curb, both of them looking at the courtyard, at the fig tree, at the house they hadn't known I could afford. They didn't come to the door that day. They came 3 days later. I watched them walk up to my gate through the video doorbell I'd installed the week I moved in. Brandon rang the bell. I let them wait 30 seconds, then opened the front door without opening the gate. Brandon looked like he hadn't slept in a week. He probably hadn't. Amber clearly cried recently and had done careful repair work on her face that didn't quite cover everything. "Dad." His voice was rougher than I'd heard it in years. "Can we talk?" I looked at them through the gate. "You gave me 60 days. I was out and dirty. Dad, please." Amber stepped forward. "Doug, we owe you an apology. We were wrong. We treated you like—" She stopped, made herself continue. "We treated you like you were an imposition, like we were doing you a favor, and we weren't. You were family, and we treated you badly, and I'm sorry." She meant some of it. That was interesting. The part about treating me badly. She meant that. The part she hadn't said, The thing underneath, the awareness that the apology was also the last move available to her, that was there too. I gave her credit for knowing the difference and saying it anyway. "Tell me something," I said, "and I want you to answer honestly because I'll know if you're not. Would you be standing at this gate if Howard hadn't called Brandon in for that meeting?" Silence. A long one. Brandon answered, "I don't know. Maybe not. Probably not." He looked at the ground. Does that make the apology worth less? It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in 2 years. "It makes it complicated," I said. I didn't open the gate that day. I told them I needed time and that I'd reach out when I was ready. Brandon asked about the kids, whether they could at least bring the kids to see me. I said I would contact them about that separately. I called Owen and Maya's school the following week and arranged to take them for ice cream after school on a Friday, with Brandon and Amber's knowledge. Maya ran to me in the parking lot. Owen shook my hand first and then hugged me, which was so entirely Owen that I had to look away for a second. We sat in a booth and they told me everything. School, friends, a hamster named Copernicus that Owen had gotten for his birthday. Maya showed me drawings she'd been saving for me on her tablet. I told them I had a fig tree that needed 2 people to help pick figs in the fall, and asked if they thought they could manage that. Owen said he'd researched fig cultivation. Of course he had. When Brandon picked them up, he waited by the car while Amber came to the door of the ice cream shop. "Thank you," she said, "for this." I nodded. She hesitated. "The blog is gone. I deleted it." She said it like she was reporting a consequence she'd accepted. "I've been thinking a lot about who I was in that house. With you there. I don't like what I see when I think about it." I believed her. People can surprise you. That's what makes them hard. I met with Howard again the following month. Not to change the will. I didn't change the will. But I told him I'd be meeting with Brandon and Amber, that I wanted to establish some terms, and that I wanted the meeting on record. The meeting happened at Howard's office. Neutral ground. I brought nothing but a notepad. Brandon and Amber sat across the table looking like people who had stopped sleeping properly. I told them 4 things. 1. The will stays as written. This is not a negotiation. Owen and Maya are protected. The rest goes to charity and to Pan. 100,000 to Brandon. That number reflects what I feel is appropriate given everything, and it won't change based on behavior from this point forward, good or bad. I said this so they understood that what came next had nothing to do with inheritance. 2. I want a relationship with my grandchildren. Regular, scheduled, consistent. I will take Owen and Maya 1 weekend a month. I will attend school events when invited. This is not a request. 3. My relationship with Brandon will require work from both of us, and will move at the pace I decide. There will be no timeline. There will be no pressure. If he wants to rebuild something, the door is open. It will never be the door it was, but it's open. 4. Amber. I looked at her directly. She held my gaze. I said that what she'd said at my gate, the honest part, the part about seeing who she'd been and not liking it, was the most useful thing either of them had said to me in 2 years. I told her that the path forward, if there was one, started exactly there. She didn't cry. She nodded. That was the right response. Brandon signed the agreement Howard had prepared. Formal acknowledgement of the monthly arrangement, the $400, as voluntary contributions, not obligation. Documentation that no loans had been made, no informal agreements existed, nothing that could become a claim later. Clean lines. I wanted clean lines. After Howard left the room to make copies, Brandon and I sat across from each other in the quiet. "I used to tell people you were the toughest man I knew," he said, "when I was a kid." "I bragged about you." "I know," I said. "What happened to us?" I thought about this carefully. "You got comfortable," I said. Comfortable with taking. Comfortable with Amber's version of things. Comfortable with the idea that I was lucky to have a place to sleep. I paused. "And I let you. For 14 months, I let you. For 14 months, I let you. That part is on me." He had nothing to say to that. Neither did I for a moment. "Your mother would be disgusted," I said finally. Not cruelly, just factually. Not with you being imperfect, with you being passive. Carol had no patience for passive. Something moved across his face. He knew I was right. I'm going to try, he said. Good, I said. That's the beginning. 6 months later, my life looks like something I designed on purpose because I did. I walk in the mornings, past the neighbor with the 2 retrievers who always stops to talk, past the bakery that opens at 7 and always has something that smells like cinnamon, around the block and back to my courtyard. The fig tree is going to need attention this fall, and I've already told Owen he's in charge of the east side. I mentor 2 mornings a week through a small business development program at the Chamber of Commerce. Contractors, mostly. Young people with licenses and ambition and no idea how to make payroll or negotiate a contract or deal with a client who won't pay. I know all of those problems. I have coffee, I ask questions, I tell them the things nobody told me. Pam calls on Sundays. Sometimes we talk for 10 minutes, sometimes for 2 hours. She's coming in October to help me get the garden ready for winter, and we're going to argue about the right way to prune a fig tree, which I'm told is something only one of us actually knows anything about. Owen and Maya came last weekend. We made breakfast. Owen read me the recipe like he was briefing me on a project. Maya cracked every egg with total confidence and 0 accuracy. After breakfast, we sat in the courtyard, and Owen asked me questions about the business I'd built, how I'd started, what I'd gotten wrong, serious questions. The kind that remind you that the next generation is paying attention whether or not you know it. I told him the truth, all of it, the bad years, the clients who didn't pay, the employee I'd trusted who stole from me, the year I almost lost everything and didn't because I refused to stop. He listened the way smart kids listen, still, focused, storing it. Did you ever want to quit? He asked. Every hard thing looks like the right time to quit, I said. The trick is knowing the difference between quitting and stopping. He thought about that. Then he said, "What's the difference?" Quitting is giving up on something that still has value. Stopping is deciding you've taken it as far as it should go. I paused. Selling the business wasn't quitting. Moving out of your parents' house wasn't quitting either. Both of those were stops. He nodded slowly, like he was filing it away somewhere useful. Maya, who had been drawing the fig tree this entire time, held up her paper. The tree had a face. It looked like it was thinking. "That's very good," I said. "I know," she said. "I still have Carol's photograph on the dresser in my bedroom. The one from our first anniversary. She's looking at the camera with that particular expression she had when she found something quietly funny, but wasn't sure you'd understand the joke. I look at it in the mornings sometimes. I think she'd find the last 2 years quietly funny. I think she'd understand the joke. I'm not angry at Brandon. I was for a while, in the way you're angry at yourself, for being surprised by something you should have seen coming. He's my son, the boy you cried when he lost his first baseball game and laughed the hardest at his own jokes, and once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because I was sick and he didn't want me to be alone. That person is still in there somewhere. He's just had years of choosing the easy thing, and it's made the harder things harder. He's trying now. I see it in the way he talks to Owen, more carefully than he used to. In the way he asks me questions at the edge of conversations, tentative, like someone testing ice before stepping. I don't make it easy. I don't make it hard. I let it be what it is. Some lessons have to cost something. Otherwise, they're not lessons, they're stories you tell yourself. Brandon needed to feel the cost fully before anything underneath could change. The 14 months I spent in that spare bedroom weren't wasted. They were the price of knowing what I needed to know. My house in Arcadia is quiet in the evenings. The courtyard holds the last of the afternoon light longer than you'd expect. Something about the walls and the angles, and I sit out there sometimes with a book. I'm not reading, just sitting in the kind of quiet that belongs to you entirely. I'm 64 years old. I built something from nothing and sold it for what it was worth. I know who my daughter is. I know who my grandchildren are becoming. I know now who my son is and isn't. and I know what I'm willing to work with. That's enough to build a good life on. More than enough, actually. Enough, and then some. If this story stayed with you, I'd be grateful if you'd share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment telling me what time it is where you are. I read every one. And if you haven't subscribed to Silent Revenge Stories yet, the button's right below. There's another story waiting for you on the left. I've thought a lot about what the last 2 years actually cost me. Not the money. The money was never the point. What it cost me was the version of my son I'd been holding on to long after the evidence said I should let it go. That's the hardest accounting. Not the balance sheet. The people. Here's what I know to be true, and I know it because I lived it. How you treat someone when you believe they need you more than you need them. That's who you are. Not who you are on your best day. Not who you are when the stakes are visible. Who you are in the ordinary moments when you think nobody's keeping score. Amber counting the groceries. Brandon clearing his throat before saying the rehearsed thing. 14 months of small choices that added up to one large answer. I'm not exempt from this. I made choices too. I stayed longer than I needed to. I handed Brandon at $400 every month and watched it get accepted like a cable bill. And I told myself it was a test when part of it was just hope. Hope that I was wrong about what I was seeing. I wasn't wrong, but the hoping wasn't weakness. It was the last thing a father does before he accepts the truth about his child. I don't regret the hoping. I just stopped doing it when the evidence became impossible to argue with. What I'd call intelligence isn't knowing everything in advance. It's being honest about what you're actually observing, even when what you're observing is painful. Brandon and Amber weren't monsters. They were people who had gotten comfortable with a particular story, that I was the one who needed them, and had stopped asking whether the story was true. Comfort does that. It narrows your vision down to whatever confirms what you already believe. The cure for it isn't punishment. It's consequence. Real, unavoidable, this is what happens consequence. Some people only update the story when the old story becomes too expensive to keep telling. That's not a condemnation. That's just how it works for a lot of people. Brandon is trying now. I see it. It's imperfect and sometimes awkward, and he still clears his throat before saying the hard thing, but he's saying it. That matters. What a person does after they've been wrong matters more than the fact that they were wrong in the first place. I built a business on that principle. Mistakes happen. What you do next is the actual measure. Owen asked me once what I'd gotten wrong in building the company. I told him the truth. I trusted the wrong person twice and was slow to act both times because I didn't want to believe what I was seeing. The lesson wasn't to stop trusting people. The lesson was to trust what I actually observed over what I hoped was true. He's 9 years old and he filed that away somewhere. I could see it happen. That's the thing about integrity. It's not a speech you give. It's a pattern of behavior that either exists in your life or doesn't, and the people paying attention will see it regardless of what you say. Owen is paying attention. Maya is too, in her own way, the way she draws everything around her and tries to understand its shape. They're going to be fine. Better than fine. As for me, I'm 64. I walk in the mornings, I mentor people who are building something from nothing, and I sit in my courtyard in the evenings in a quiet that belongs entirely to me. I earned this. Not just the house. The quiet. That's worth more than the 9.4 million, but I'll admit, having both is pretty good.